inspired by poetry.
Let's give it some lip.
Ta-da.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Lovely to have you join us. I'm Ginna, and I'm here with TB. How you doing today?
I'm good, but with a heavy heart.
Is that because of the topic that we've chosen for today?
Unfortunately, the answer is yes.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a content warning. We are going to be talking about abuse in a lot of different forms, but mostly we're going to be looking at domestic violence and relationships that break down, that should be strong, that should be loving, that should be supportive, become broken.
Yeah. And it's a so I do say with a heavy heart, because I think we have to talk about it, but there's no enjoyment in talking about it. But I think it's necessary that we do, in that our relationships are so important and so sacred. And yet what we're talking about today is about what happens when they go wrong.
Yeah, when relationships go wrong.
When they go wrong.
Yeah. And I know that you've been doing some work in the domestic violence space.
I have been.
Yeah, and you're doing some teaching on that right now. So
I am.
That's kind of one of the reasons why it's been so at the forefront of our minds when we've had chats and stuff. And what are we noticing about the trend in Australia when it comes to domestic violence? Because I know there's been a lot of ads and campaigns to raise awareness for it. Yeah. Is it having any impact on the actual statistics?
So I think domestic violence is a very complex subject matter, and it deals with the complexities of the different types of relationships we have and what happens within those relationships. So my first thing is, I think we're being naive to believe that awareness is bringing about change. I think we're
shine a spotlight on it, but you don't do anything.
You don't do anything about it because we're not dealing with the root cause of it. Awareness really, I think, helps victims understand what responses are available to them, what services are in it. It does offer some relief, so I'm not suggesting that it does nothing.
Right.
But what I'm suggesting is that we have to deep dive into understand why it happens. And the trend in Australia, as well as worldwide, is increasing.
Wow. So
it's not going down.
It's not going down.
No, it's not going down.
The fact that we are aware that these relationships break down, and we understand that, there's help if relationships are going wrong. We're still not making better choices in those relationships.
Yeah, and I think that maybe, and I use this as an example it's our cultural tolerance for violence, right? Is that if as a culture we see that a way to settle a dispute could be by use of force, and we've learned over time that works, and we continue to do it. And in this class, I was relating the relationship I had with my younger brother, that we fought all throughout growing up, and then in puberty it stopped, right?
Right.
Because that's the age that you're told you can no longer do that.
Yeah.
And for most people, I think we grow out of it. Right?
Yeah.
When we realize that it's no longer a fair fight.
Yeah.
And so it's not smart for either party to engage in it.
Right.
Right. But for some people, they don't. They resort back to that.
Yeah. And when we talk about domestic violence, are we solely talking about physical abuse, or is it more of a spectrum of different types of verbal, emotional, mental?
I would say that the stats that we look at today is primarily going to be based on physical violence, because I don't believe that many people would be reporting the emotional abuses in the relationships, because they first have to acknowledge it's abuse.
Right.
And I think that the entanglement of that relationship often does not allow you the freedom to say that out loud.
Yeah.
Right?
That offers another complexity.
It's another complexity. And we need to recognize that that's part of the relational complexity. And what I try to get through to the group that I'm working with is look at it from its power dynamics. Right? If you look at it as a power dynamic, and then you think about that act is an abuse within that power dynamic. So maybe substantively what we need to talk about is how do we balance out the power in our society, never concentrating power in one group.
Right.
So that the disputes can be settled more amicably because it's a balanced response, because no one holds the upper edge.
Yeah. And in some ways, I guess, when you get to that, the physical level of abuse, you probably have those other elements, verbal,
They've been
emotional,
happening. Yeah.
mental, they've been there. And that becomes the manifestation, the physical manifestation of the already suffered abuse.
And it's a thing we see, because we don't necessarily see the emotional abuse.
Right.
We don't necessarily see the control. We don't necessarily see all the lead up to what then is presented as physical abuse.
So do you think that stems from a narcissistic mentality? Maybe not only in the individual, but maybe culturally? Like, is it something that we are learning through our interactions, or is it something that's more programmed?
I don't want to negate the complexity of this. To believe that it's narcissism would have to accept that 1 in 2 people are narcissists, right? And I don't think I'm ready to accept that within the cultures yet. So I maybe have different explanations about it. Part of it is behavioral reinforcement and validation, right? If we see violence as a way of getting what we want, and we always get what we want by using violence, then there's always an incentive to use violence to get what we want, right? Or to control.
Yeah, but if you say that power is at the heart of it, then that stems from a self-focused place of putting your power above someone else's, right? So, I mean, at some point, there is the belief that
your entitlements are more important.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there is that. I think there's that dimension to it. I think that's that dimension to it. But I think that you could have, a lack of impulse control, people who just
I know
don't think before they act. There's not one thing.
But I do. I'm just thinking about our social media, crazed society where it is all about putting myself. Not me. I don't. But people putting themselves first and like, look at me, and that their world becomes. Well, their world,
the ordained,
and they're the center, right?
It's all about me.
Yeah.
Maybe we've gone back to toddlerdom. Maybe we're resorting to it. Yeah, it's mine. I must have it now.
That's right.
Maybe that's we never grow out of it. There's so many different ways to live.
Could be. It's quite a lot of times it is possessive.
It is. You own things. So, as a child, you can own things, right? Yeah. But some adults still believe they can own people.
Yeah.
I mean, it hasn't grown out. We've seen it throughout our history. I don't think this is I look at domestic violence the way I look at all other abuses of power within our society. It stems from the need to control and to put one's own relevance above all other things. And we validate that in some way, and the validation of that in society, I think, is as much of a problem as the act itself.
There's a heartbreaking element to it, isn't there? Especially in the domestic sphere, where that's supposed to be the place where you feel the safest, and you're the most vulnerable in that. And for someone to think that violence is that way to get that control in that environment.
Absolutely.
It baffles the mind, really.
It does. And that's what makes it feels so much worse.
I mean, we haven't even started the poetry, and I have so many feelings going on inside my body right now.
So this week, I just feel like my whole entire soul is feeling it.
Yeah.
Like every part of me has felt it. And I'm doing it as a third party objective in this teaching, and yet I feel it so much. So I just reach out to anyone who has experienced DV or abuse or any of those things of assault, and my heart's with you.
Yeah, definitely. I think you mentioned the statistics.
Yeah,
that it's 1 in 4, but it's getting closer to almost being 1 in 3, or maybe even 1 in 2.
So in most countries, it's between 1 in 4 and 1 in 3. In some countries, it's as high as 1 in 2. and
who have experiences.
These are reported.
Yeah.
This is reported. And we do know that these things are often so personal that they don't even get reported, right? So,
or they're personalize it.
Correct. You internalize it.
I deserve it.
Yeah. You internalize it. And, and the definitions vary from country to country. And think about what constitutes domestic violence.
Yeah.
And I like the Vietnamese definition of it, though.
Tell me about that.
Violence in the home. So we don't, like here in Australia, we categorize it like you have child abuse, right? Spousal abuse. You have animal cruelty. But they're just like, no, if it's happened in the home, that's domestic. And I like that. And we could argue whether or not that's right or wrong. That power abuse is happening on some level to a relationship within the home at which that's not acceptable.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you're going to share a couple of your poems.
I'm going to try.
But before we get to that, let's do this one called Abuse, and it's by Audrey.
Yeah.
And again, content warning. It's a good one to start with because it really does, unfortunately, set the tone.
Yeah.
He pulls my hair. He slaps my face. He kicks me on the floor. I love him so much, so I don't have the strength to walk right out that door. There's blood on my face, everything hurts, and all I can do is cry. I made him mad, so this is what he does. I wish I knew his reason why. My heart won't let me leave him, and it hurts too much to try. I wonder if this is how my life will be from now until I die. He says he's sorry, he takes me in his arms, he even starts to cry. I tell him I forgive him, and that everything is fine, for now at least, because I know it will happen again in time.
I don't know what you're feeling, but every sense in my body has been affected by those words. Every sense I have.
Yeah.
Visually, I love its rawness. Doesn't mask it through metaphors.
Yeah, that's right.
It just is.
Yeah.
I hear the sound of the slap. I see the bleeding. And what really does it for me is the complexity of a relationship that stanza by stanza, it's intertwined. There's no separation between the two.
That's right.
The actions can be separated, but the relationship between the stanzas from him to I is just so profound for me.
And it's the way that it is structured, you're right, shows that unity so well, because the first stanza, he pulls, he slaps, he kicks.
Yeah.
And then the next line after that is, I love him so much.
Yeah.
Then later in the poem, I think it's stanza 7, it says, he takes, he even starts to cry. I tell him I forgive him.
Yeah.
So.
Monster, I love him.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I saw. It's like, I know what is happening is wrong, but.
Yeah.
I know what is happening, but.
I know.
So
and this really does show that kind of complexity, as you mentioned, but that cyclical, almost roller coaster of, at times the relationship is good or seems good. There's always that undercurrent of another, low that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And abuse that's going to come.
Yeah.
And the resignation.
Yeah.
That I wonder if this is how it's going to be until I die.
Exactly. The powerlessness of the hurt, the tears of crying, the recognition that death is the end of this.
Yeah.
And the continuation of it, the continuity that in that last line, it will happen again in time.
And we just go back up to the top and start this whole poem over again.
Yeah, cycle.
Yep. It is very much the cycle. So that anaphora of those he that begins those ones, again, situates him, or at least his actions, as separate and not conducive to the relationship, but everything else is the speaker's inability to extricate herself from him.
Yeah.
Oh, it fills me with so many emotions. Like, one of them is rage.
Yeah, and it is, and when as I look at it, like, somehow thinking that his actions are not him. You know, there's that separation between those two things.
It is. Yeah.
Being able to justify, I
him,
love him,
but I don't
but the actions I don't like.
Yeah. And making that as though it's not one and the same.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to think about a predator.
Yeah.
And separate the person you knew from the action that they did. And I'm using that as a little bit of a transition because I know your poetry, even though it's not based on an experience you personally had, it's based on one that was very close to you because you knew the people involved. So I'll let you tell the story.
And I'm going to say I am personally involved, but I'm a bystander.
Yeah.
So I am personally involved, and I wonder how many people who, like me, were bystanders to these things and how it made them feel.
Yeah.
So the two pieces I'm going to talk about, the first one happened like my sophomore year in college, in which I didn't drink. I was there to make sure all my friends got home safely.
Yeah.
And one weekend I wasn't, and something bad happened.
Oh.
And it's
so
raw.
Did you live with that? Did you
lived with that. I was
for a while. Did you feel
guilty?
Yeah,
guilty. It ruined my relationship with one of my best friends because I felt powerless and I couldn't help. And I never had that happen to me before, where I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do, and it ruined. And also, she became a different person in that. And it is raw. And we kind of discussed between you and I whether or not, you know, it was something we're willing to share, because this piece for me is a raw piece.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to make it sound anything than the way I saw it as a 19-year-old. And it's called Raped.
Yeah.
So I'll read it and then we'll talk about it. And I also wrote a second poem because I knew both parties, trying to capture the perspectives of both.
Wow.
So let's start with raw.
Okay, let's start.
When the raped, his touch was cold, his hand steel rough and razor sharp. He fondled my breast with his many hands, grabbing, gnawing, grating, and groping. His eyes like laser sliced through my soul, leaving it an anorexic reflection of its former self. This frail mess of manhood was like a cement building weighing heavily against my body. As my mirrored image slowly disappears into the darkness of a shadow, no, I screamed no. My eyes, hell no. The touch of his fingers, a cold, clammy squid-like feel, dripping a scornful grime over my mosaic beauty. He pinched, pawed, pressed, and pounced as he pulled at my clothing and tugged at my words. An empty reflection of a man whose presence once towered above and inhaled my deepest emotions. A familiar face whose eyes once danced across a crowded room, eliciting an unknown conviction, as translucent as light, the drunken desires of a bully. The cold, expressionless face of boys, eager to engage in the machismo of forbidden love, practice the art of forceful persuasion on the maimed bodies of women. I floated in the distance, shackled by fear, frozen in anger, raped.
Whoa, that rawness is very evident in that. Now, I don't think we've got into the story here from your perspective, but these two knew each other.
They knew each other.
Yeah.
And he was like a hottie in college. Like he was the guy that you really liked from a distance. You know, we admired him.
Yeah.
So a relationship could have ensued.
Yeah.
But this power abuse was not the way it was intended.
Right. Because you have that moment in there where it's talking about the face familiar.
Yes.
And to show that there was that trust that was built that was totally shattered.
Shattered.
And the imagery that you use with mirroring, I think you use it twice. Once the shadow of the self, and then a poor reflection later on as well for the perpetrator.
Yeah.
It's off. I mean, the good bookends to show us that, and that the idea of floating above almost. Oh yeah, and I think there was a line at the beginning. Now an anorexic version of
Myself,
myself.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That was, and you were 19
I was 19
when you wrote this.
I was 19.
Yeah. There's
But I was probably more of a feminist back then than I am today. So it was very strong language, and it was raw because it was intended to be.
Yeah.
Because I saw that as the ultimate betrayal of trust.
Yeah. And that comes through, especially in that section where you repeat, I think, an alliteration with the P sound.
The pressing, the pawn. Yeah.
Yeah. And that just, it's, I as I was listening to it, I'm like, that's where it disintegrates, that relationship, you know, like.
Well, the grabbing and the gnawing.
And that as well.
So I tried to do that as a way of what would it feel like to have someone that I admire from afar or that I look up to, and all of these acts that I wanted to say, they're repetitive and depressive and hostile all at the same time. And I tried to do that as a way of reinforcing that was not a love between equals.
It wasn't,
This is a horrible experience that happened.
Yeah.
And
that moment, the alliterative moment of that harsh P sound comes straight after no. And
hell no coming from the eyes, right? There is no doubt. And what I wanted to do there was to show that even if she didn't say no out loud, you knew in her eyes, if you were looking at her eyes at any point, you would know that was not ever to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. This effectively ruined 2 relationships because you did know the instigator of this, the perpetrator, and the one that was assaulted. And
it changed me too.
Of course it would.
Because I had
set yourself up as that.
But I had guilt. I felt a lot of guilt. The whole friendship group changed as a result of that. And I used writing this poem as a therapeutic moment for me to come to terms with, she was okay retreating.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't push her to do anything because I can understand. If I could only embody that experience through poetry, then I could understand how she must be feeling and why she didn't feel safe with any of us.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I needed to do that. So for me, this was a therapeutic moment for all of us in stepping back and saying, you know what? If this happened to me, I could probably do exactly what she's doing and feel so unsafe that none of these relationships will be the same.
That's right. Yeah. And that idea of using poetry, I mean, that comes from narrative therapy.
Yeah.
Counselors use that quite a bit, especially if there's something that's hard to discuss because it is so raw and weepy.
Yeah.
The wound is still weepy.
Yeah.
If you create a piece, whether that's in drawing, painting, poetry, narrative, whatever it might be, it becomes an object.
Yeah.
And now you can look at it differently because it's no longer swampy within.
Yeah.
But now something tangible that you can look at and maybe some healing. But that's the hope with narrative therapy or artistic therapy.
Permissibility as well, right?
Yeah.
Doing this gives you permission to
examine it
and say it out loud, right? I think the more you hold things in, the less permission you have.
Yeah. That kind of suppression.
Yeah.
And it just eats away at you, festers. Yeah. And so at some point you went, okay, well, if I put myself in
20 years later, I should say.
Oh, 20 years.
It took me 20 years to say there could be another side to this.
Okay. All right.
20 years later.
So 20 years later.
I was watching a film about the breakdown in a relationship within a couple. I can't remember the name of the film. And for the first time in my life since I was 19, I could see there could potentially be another side to this.
Right.
For the 20 years, I couldn't see that, but for the first time I could. And I call that my journey to maturity, right? I think as a poet, being able to look at the same thing from different perspectives is a very important journey within the art and within the soul. And so I wanted to look at it as because I knew him, I needed to think for a second, there was more to it than just that one night.
Right.
Okay. And what he might be feeling.
Carried.
She's carried. Yeah.
Yeah. And
He's
so,
scared.
like looking probably at the two when the event happened, one probably disintegrated
Yeah.
in front of your eyes while the other continued on.
Yeah, visibly. I couldn't see the difference in his life, but I could see the difference in hers. But I don't know.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Exactly.
So I tortured myself after 20 years.
Yeah.
Tortured myself after 20 years to consider his remorse of what he might be feeling. And I wish I knew the name of the film because it had a profound impact on me to say, you know, TB, guess what?
Yeah.
He was also a friend. Could you understand what had happened? Mm-hmm. And so I challenged myself to at least consider it, not as an excuse, but from a position of remorse, the regret of having done that. Yeah. So
it's called his remorse.
It's called his remorse. If only the tears in your eyes was a passion I recalled as I touched you that day, and not the monsoon that actually followed. If only your moans were of pleasure, not fear, I would have given you fulfillment, completed the journey of our embrace. If only I could see what you saw that night, I could grasp the magnitude of the pain I have imposed for a mere 5 seconds of pleasure that would haunt our lives without limit. If only I was not so eager to conquer, I may have heard your screams and retreated because it was a hollow victory. If only I could go back in time, read the cues as obvious as your terror, I could make good your normal state of being. Then you could grow into the beautiful woman God intended, not the tortured soul I have molded from hate. If only I can free you from the anguish, we could even be friends.
Whoa. There's such a power in that repetitive if only, because it's like, no, you can't.
Exactly.
Like, as much as this remorse might be there,
you can't, and
it doesn't change, and it can't undo.
No.
Like, and so much of it, you have in there these little things that are just, it was a fleeting moment, 5 seconds of pleasure, and now it's going to haunt our lives without limits. Yeah, I mean, you've captured in this if there was reflection on the moment.
Yeah.
Because I think you've told me that said they weren't aware of what was happening.
They're not aware.
Yeah. But then to see, you would think that seeing the reaction, that you would have some reflection. And this would probably be some of the things I wish I would have seen, I wish I would have known, I wish I would have been attuned to. Yeah.
And I think what happens when these relationship breaks down is that while the suffering is occurring, many times the perpetrator automatically shifts into this defensive mode, right? Of protecting because, for whatever reasons. So they don't have that point of reflection. Yeah. And so I gifted that point of reflection through his remorse, that maybe if he could see all these moments of if only these things, then friendships would have continued. We could all be friends. Yeah.
Such a destructive moment for so many, and especially the one who was violated.
Yeah.
But I mean, and so many around that as well. And you have to stop and consider that when there is some sort of violation or assault or abuse, it's not only, mostly it's the person who's experiencing it, but that person and those close to her or him there's going to be changes in all of that. And it's going to have this ripple effect through all kinds of family and friend groups.
Yeah. I wish we'd understand that. I don't think we grasp that. And the point you're making is exactly the point, right? Because if we understood that when these things happen in relationships, we are all affected.
We are all affected.
Then we would do more.
We're all connected.
We're all connected.
And like, harm to one is harm to all.
The level of trust, the ability to be able to reach out and care, and futures of how we relate to each other all of this is intermingled in this, right? That's what I mean by the messy complexities of these relationships.
And that's
Relationships are not exclusive to each other.
Yeah.
They're exclusive to each other and others, within others and among others. So we cannot separate this as just what we're saying. We have to say, what is the greatest societal consequence? And we can never be the same. I can never be the same that I was as an 18-year-old, and I've been very much shaped by this my entire life.
Yeah.
Shaped by my entire life. And it didn't happen to me directly.
Yeah. But
it shaped me. But I'm saying the fact that I wasn't the victim and I felt it throughout my entire life, imagine.
I know.
The victim. And all of the friendships that we had during that time, they all changed in different ways. Yeah. But I think it was all resulting from that.
It would have been.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have been a momentous, unfortunately, in a bad momentous,
bad way.
You know, act that shattered so much. Your imagery that you've used in both these poems just speaks volumes to all of this. And it was interesting in this last one where that you have that one then you could have. And I read that and it sounds so beautiful, but it's heartbreaking because it was taken.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then I go back to if
only.
And that's deliberate. Yeah. Is that you can't go back.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's no resolution.
You can't go back.
You can't end with a then.
You can't go back.
We can only live in the if only.
Yeah. And
I can never take an act away.
And I struggled. I thought, could I give him the then? And I'm going, I couldn't.
No.
I couldn't.
Yeah.
Because if only,
exactly.
I couldn't. So I found myself, even in that moment, going, I could end with, and then we could be friends. But no, I can't.
No.
Because that gate has opened.
Yeah.
The water's coming out. It just is.
That's right. There's no putting it back.
There's no putting it back.
No. Oh my goodness. These have been phenomenal. I mean, yes, this topic is hard.
Yeah.
But I think what we're seeing through these is that connectivity of all.
Yeah.
Not just the ones involved in the relationship that has gone wrong.
Yeah.
But that relationship that has gone wrong impacts all of us.
Yeah.
And it continues like it's a microcosm for something else that obviously has gone wrong in our world that we need to fix.
Yeah.
And that the idea that we just love one another.
Yeah.
Like we are all connected.
Yeah.
And the more that we respect, cherish, love, even if we disagree.
Value.
Yeah. Even if we disagree with somebody, that doesn't mean that they're worthless.
Yeah.
Or have no value or are ripe to be abused.
Yeah.
No. And that's not going on with any of this.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, even in that situation.
I hope it all gives us pause in our lives to think about our relationships and also to think about our role as bystanders. And witness. I hope the last two poems have done that. That you can't be the same if you see it.
That's right.
Right? You don't have to be the victim of it. You can't be the same if you see it.
That's right. That's just.
And you shouldn't.
That's right.
And you absolutely shouldn't.
And we need to speak. We need to speak against.
You need to speak it.
Yeah.
We're parents, we're friends, we're sisters, we're brothers, we're husbands, we're wives, we're all of these things. And we have a responsibility to the people in our lives to help shore that protection and security, especially within and among the relationships that we have. Yeah. And therefore, we can't be passive bystanders.
We're all implicated.
We're all implicated. And we're all accomplices if we do nothing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Ooh, heavy stuff to leave on. But thank you so much for sharing those. I know those are raw.
Yeah.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. I know it might not have been the easiest one because of the content and the topic that we were discussing, but hopefully it's given you, like TB said, some pause to consider our role in shaping this world and the way that we want to value one another.
Yeah. And I think my concluding words are this, for me, is about what poetry is about. The creative intelligence of how we use the art to deal with some of our most pressing and challenging issues.
Yeah.
I don't want to say crisis, but I don't know, maybe that's alarmist, but some of our pressing issues.
Yeah.
And that the role that poetry plays in that, it eases us into the conversation and discourse around these things. Yeah. And, you know,
and poetry doesn't make something happen, but it's a mouth. It's a megaphone.
Correct.
You know, to at least get us to
talk about it.
Oh, this is something that now I have to put into practice. Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you again so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
It's been a pleasure. And I feel a little bit lighter, so that's good.
That's good.
A little bit lighter.
All right. Well, we'll catch everybody next time. And thanks again, TB.
Next time. Signing off.